Oh, cool. I can even take off my glasses because I don't have to look at the charts, and this is fantastic.
Oh, sexy time. Here we go. Jason Perz, welcome to the Off the Charts podcast. Great to have you here. I'm Sean McLaughlin. You know Steve Straza. Jason, welcome.
Glad to be here. Glad to be hanging out with you guys off the charts. Let's do it. This is going to be a lot of fun.
So me and Straza are very excited about this conversation because of all the guests that we've had so far and all the guests that we expect to have in the future, you are probably the one who has the most interesting backstory outside of trading and around trading. So Straza, tell me what you were telling me earlier about Jason that is just like kind of mind-blowing.
Well, he called me, and like I was saying, I was like, this guy, he's got a TED Talk. He's a BMX rider. Like, go look him up. Jason's a guy. But this podcast, Jason and I were just doing other content for the last hour. We're talking about charts. We're getting really technical. This is more about like, who are you? Journey, process, life. So let's take it back. Tell everybody who you are, and let's just start from the beginning.
Wow. I always have to say so many things about who I am that have nothing to do with who I am. So this is cool. So I'm Jason Perz. I grew up as a professional BMX rider. I did a TED Talk after that. I had struggle with addiction after that. So I did a TED Talk shortly after that. I started many companies in BMX. One was a bicycle show team. We were traveling around doing shows at fairs, halftime NBA shows, halftime NFL shows. Also, when I was a professional bike rider, I competed in X Games, Dew Tour, and more. So yeah, I filmed a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff on the internet out there. I still get brought on to random podcasts once in a great while where somebody's like, "Hey, you're that old guy who was really good back in the day." And like, I'll get brought on to podcasts once in a while. So random people will see that from time to time. But that was some of the best years of my life. It was a lot of fun riding. Had a lot of fun, had a lot of injuries. And then, got into trading after that. And here I am today.
So how long have you been trading now?
So I started my first time in the market was actually when I was only about 15 years old. I had a great uncle though, who was a really fantastic investor. He was a great guy, really wild story. So he's a great uncle. So was much older than me. When in the 30s and 40s, if you were like a little bit slow or off at that point, your family just thought you were slow and you were done. He was actually autistic.
It would give you a lobotomy. It would just
basically back then. But he also wrote left-handed, so they just thought he was slow, something was wrong with him, and so they kicked him out of the house at a very young age. Fast forward, he ended up teaching himself how to be a mechanic. Taught himself how to trade the markets, taught himself how to, he used to hire, he actually didn't read proficiently. He used to hire his family members actually to read to him. He was very wealthy. He had, houses, but he didn't buy the houses because he wanted anything crazy money-wise. He wanted to take care of the family. Basically, my grandmother's father died at a very young age, and so he wanted to take care of the family that didn't abandon him. And so he ended up buying like a big apartment complex to put the family up in. And this is his first time getting into investments. Then he bought houses, rented out houses. But it was funny, all those years later, he actually had only car he ever bought was a Buick. He'd buy a new Buick every like 10 years, but he would never buy it with 0 miles on it. Like for some reason, he like loved this Buick. That was like his biggest thing in the world. So he ends up getting a Buick. He gets this, it has 10,000 miles on it every time because he refused to buy it with 0 because he said it was a waste of money. He could have bought any car on the lot without even blinking, but he never did. He lived a very modest lifestyle. Like a very interesting man. Has an even more interesting story about Japanese going into internment camps and him actually not taking them into the internment camp. So it's just wild stories about this guy. Anyways, growing up, he was very kind to me, just a great man to me. So I was adopted. So my family looked at me a little bit differently. Not that they were mean to me or anything, but I think sometimes you just feel a certain way about them. as years went on, that changed, but early on, that wasn't the case. But he was always super kind to me, super sweet to me. Taught me about trading, taught me about gold, taught me about the Fed, had like a kind of an Austrian style mindset, taught me about the writer Richard Russell. So basically, like all of these interesting things I learned from him. And so about the time I was like 15, 16, I'm already buying gold. He's giving me little coins for holidays instead of anything else. And so that's kind of got me interested in investing. And then I started to get books. Now the books at the time, they're very fundamental based. Yes, he did technicals. He also did have like point and figure charts that he wrote himself. But he was mainly fundamental based, so I kind of learned that style first. And then as the years went on, like probably getting serious, opened my own trading account to really start getting into it. That was about 2009. I was one of those people who thought it was going to be super easy because I was going to buy after a recession and it was just going to be easy. I'm going to make all the money in the world. And that wasn't the case. So I started losing money pretty quickly at that point. So this led me to technical analysis, which led me to systematic trading.
Wow. So it's amazing you had a mentor like that, someone who really took an interest in you and kind of gave you an unconventional education in a lot of ways, in all the good ways.
Yeah, I think it's mentorship is hard because you run into so many different situations over time. You can run into a mentor that actually thinks they own you, like they own what you're doing going forward, or you run into mentors that just actually like are there to help you and they just want to pay it forward. I fully believe in my life, like why I try to give away information the way I do, why I always try to like if somebody reaches out to me, I'm always down to help out whatever it is, the years ago in riding, in through the programs of, for alcoholics, through trading, like I always still try to help people out. And I always do that because I think of him and the way he kind of looked at me and he didn't have to do any of those things and really sit down and talk to me about things, but he really did. So I thought that was cool, even though he's a very quiet guy, having those conversations, I'll always remember him. And also it kind of shaped my idea of trading because I can think of if I think of the way he did it, it was very long-term cyclical investing. And I'm short-term cyclical investor, meaning I can remember 2000 him talking about, he's going to start buying commodities and stuff because the tech stocks were where they were at. He was going to buy micro caps at the time and talked about how micro caps were going to be the place to be. And I at the time I have no idea, what he's talking about. Nowadays I obviously do, but it was very interesting. So it kind of shaped my idea where like as an investor, you can't just hang out in one area. You have to be willing to move into other areas, shift your focus. People who were long tech stocks that whole time gave most of their gains all the way back. People who shifted into different areas, they continued to make money over time. So I think that's an important piece I learned.
But it's less about him teaching you maybe about cyclicals or rotation and more about like the character or personality, right? Like there tends to be a certain scrappiness to our people who do what we do, right? So like words I think about with you is like you're a self-starter, you're a doer, an entrepreneurial spirit, right? And that is usually born in a world that isn't easy, right? Because you got to reach outside of the box and do different things, right? So did you like it seems like that's in your blood. Sometimes when people ask me about like Jason, I'm like, he's just doing a million things, BMX, the this and the that, starting his YouTube channel. You're always doing something. It's inspiring. Is that something you learned from him? How did you get there? Or is it an
I think what you said is a perfect way to think about that at the beginning, which is it's born through something. And I don't know, I can't, for everybody, I can't exactly pick what that is. For me, being adopted, kind of made my grit. It was different. I was always a different kid, especially in riding. Riding is very similar to finance and trading, where it's like you don't learn anything easily. You learn everything hard. Like you fall a bunch of times to learn one trick. It's the same thing with finance. If you have money, like most traders talk about how they blew up at the beginning, because they do, because that happens. And it's like the same with riding. So I think, growing up as an adopted kid, I was also like messed with a lot in school, not because I was small, but because I speak the way I do. Both my parents are Caucasian. Kids made fun of me because I'd be like, oh and I never really knew until recently. I'd be like, my mother's African American. I thought my father at the time was Italian, and they'd be like, well, you're a white kid. Obviously, you talk like a white kid. So I got made fun of a lot in school for that. I got in a lot of fights over stupid things, but it kind of detached me from the idea of school being the only way to go. So basically, about that time, you start to become more self-sufficient. You start to read books on your own. You start to do things on your own, and you realize, like, hey, there's this whole other world here of entrepreneurship. And so when you become an entrepreneur, you absolutely are against the grain, and your grit is the only way you're going to take that next step. And so for me, the idea of building me and a buddy of mine, I have a friend who's a very successful real estate investor, incredibly successful these days. But we both were in the bike show industry at one point. And so, we always laugh at each other and say, hey, if you made money, if you made money in BMX doing bike shows, you could do anything in the world. And it's true, because it's like that. I learned so much from those shows. I mean, it's a truck and trailer service. The money isn't nearly as good as it should be. And so you have to figure out ways to make money. You have to learn how to be at three places at once, basically. So we would have days where we'd literally, I mean, I'm saying days, it was more like months of waking up in, the east side of Texas, needing to be in Corpus Christi by the morning, do a show at 9 in the morning, another show at noon, and another show at 3 p.m., all about an hour apart, somehow set up ramps, tear down, move, and probably not eat in that in the meantime. So, I mean, you learn. So I always had that kind of grit to be able to do that. And riding was kind of my biggest place to put that. And I think when I grew up as a bike rider, I was a depressed kid. I really didn't know where to put that, like, rage at the time. So, like, when I found riding, it was this great place I could kind of put all that energy. And I was always into sports. Like, I was a basketball player, I was a soccer player. I was very good at all of those things, but riding was the thing to me that just kind of took me out of my bubble and kind of put me out in the world. And I think the cool thing too was that I got to actually go out to travel the world doing this. And for me, I grew up in East Cleveland. We didn't have money to do things like that, so I didn't really see much. I think we went to North Carolina a couple of times. My grandmother lived there. And so we go to North Carolina. That was about it. But through riding, I got to see the whole United States. I got to go to Canada. I went to Iraq. I went to Japan. I went to Australia. I went to most of Europe. So basically through riding, I was able to go to all these different places. So, for me, it was freedom. And to kind of see, I think when you grow up in an area like that, you really don't see that people can do things in a different way. Some people are entrepreneurs. Some people can make money. Like, you start to think of money differently. Like, it's this thing I can do. I don't just have to work a 9 to 5. And then you start to just go, okay, well, what if I just start this? So this is fun. Like, I enjoy this. And then once you really, and I also know I'm not that great at working a normal 9 to 5 person. Like, it just doesn't fit me. It's not my personality. I don't think it's any of our personalities. And so I think it's also like what fits you as an entrepreneur. So, for me, kind of growing up that way kind of drove me into being the type of person I am today.
So, well, Jason, I'm struck with something here that's kind of amazing. Is that what Straz and I talk about on these shows a lot with people is about how trading is hard. And one of the big reasons why trading is hard for a lot of people is because people are afraid of failure. I'm looking over your right shoulder right now. You've got a poster on the wall behind you that says the word failure. So clearly failure is important to you. And I'm curious, me and Straza, we're afraid of taking big losses, but a guy like you, like, a big loss is probably nothing compared to the risks you were taking BMX biking. And, you could snap your neck if you do the wrong trick. Tell me what that was like. I mean, that's real risk. That's real failure that you should be afraid of. What was that like?
Yeah, like, were you one of the people jumping through the fire hoops at halftime at the Heat games?
Yeah.
Crazy, dude.
Yeah. So but once again, the things like that, that's actually like a show. The really hard things are the tricks. That's the hard part. The show is the fire and all that stuff, and it looks scary, but really like the tricks are hard. So, for me, like you brought up a great point where it's like losses, yes, loss isn't fun for anybody as a trader, but at the same time, you're right. I handle volatility differently than most people, and I realize that, which also makes me better at the type of trading I do, being a trend follower. Holding the cocoa position, for example. That's a great example. I'm holding the cocoa position. I don't vol target, but I don't think everybody could do that. Vol targeting means taking down your position over time. So I continue.
You're talking about that your odds of success are higher because you're willing to take steeper drawdowns. Is that basically what you're saying, right?
Yes. Yes.
And
My gain. So I've had years where I've had, for a fund, we had 179% year one year. So like I can have those crazy years, but also I think that I do have a good idea of risk management. I do have a good idea of being able to get out of things at a good time. But it's because of that, like Sean mentioned, that I can handle that type of risk. And riding wise, like you said, riding is a completely different thing. So if I'm sitting there and I'm sending, I got to ride a contest, for example, and I'm at like a big event, and I've been working on these tricks for a long time, and I've just got to jump in and try to send something that I most likely have done a couple times, and then try to send something that maybe I have never done before, especially for like what we would do that for back then was like video parts. So if I'm filming a video part, I'm going to try my hardest stuff. The amount of risk you're dealing with at that point is like, death almost, like
Yeah.
I'd love to say it's like less than that, but really that's the truth. It's like it's death. So I guess for me though, at the time I was completely okay with that. And that's kind of the same mentality I kind of have with everything is like if I want to be successful and if I want to be good at something, I am willing to kind of die for that something. Whatever it is, whether it's my family, whether it's my business, my fund, whatever it is, like I'm kind of willing to take that extreme risk for it. Am I risking everybody's money for that? No, but the amount of willingness to stay awake. I mean, I remember I'm not a trader who's a catalyst trader, but there was one trade that was a catalyst trade that actually made our year insane in 2020, which was the election in 2020. And I stayed up all night for, was it 3 days? I was about to ask, but it was about 3 days, and I ended up giving myself I got COVID, and it was really weird because I didn't go anywhere, and then also the whole family didn't get it. So like I'm insanely sick. I'm just sitting there like thinking about this trade. I get a right before that. The reason why part of that happened is because I had so many friends that were just freaked out by the election happening that I was like, well, if this is really like the fear in the world, and I'm seeing that in the hedge funds and everything else, I will continue to build up positions in these things. And it ended up being right. But once again, it's like I'm willing to push myself to that degree to do that. It's the same way with like learning how to trade was the same thing. I'm pushing myself to an insane degree to learn things. So I really think that's part of it. I think sometimes it's most people wouldn't want to put that type of stress and energy on themselves against themselves all the time. I'm interested in that. But I also don't think that's normal. Like I just think I'm a very sane person for the things I do sometimes. It's kind of like the same way with, you mentioned failure, and it's like it's part of my life in such a large degree that it's the way I learn things, but I hope it's not the way everybody learns things.
I think your background really shaped who you are as a trader. And the one obvious parallel is that you got really used to operating in a world of uncertainty, living whatever a less traditional or unconventional life, right? Which I think just a trader kind of needs to get used to. Get used to this stuff at a young age, taking risk. You have not just had some of the best performance on a quarter basis of anybody I've ever talked to, at least systems traders, right? You also tolerate steeper drawdowns, far larger drawdowns than pretty much anybody we're ever going to interview on this show. So that's the basic equation. And you learned it from a very young age now, where if you want a nice reward, you probably have to take an outsized risk. And I
Yes.
think you got comfortable with that at a young age, whether it was from your life experience, being an athlete, jumping through your fire hoops, right?
Mhm.
And then you applied that to market. So there's something there.
No,
And
it's true.
actually, to that point, I got a good question for you, Jason.
Mhm.
I'm curious what your thought is. What is harder for you is as a trend follower who goes for those big wins? Is it
Mhm.
harder for you to sit through 20 trades in a row that you lose on and you lose small, right? And that can happen over the course of several weeks or months, right? Is it harder for you to sit through 20 losses in a row? Or is it harder for you to ride a position like Coco that's going crazy and it has the potential to make your year, but man, it's a wild ride. Which one's harder for you?
That is a great question, and I would say Coco. Like it really because there's 20 losses in a row. I understand the risk there if it just goes straight to losses. Once again, it'd be surprising to hit that many in a row, but it could happen. But I understand the risk there. The risk is identified beforehand. Once you're in something like Coco, and you go, okay, the volatility of this went from I can even pull up the numbers. The volatility went from 11%, so talking about distance to my trailing stop, to 26%. Now it's at 31%.
Amazing.
So like now once again, there's an exit signal. Most likely the exit signal is way above the stop at this moment. But once again, it's like the volatility of it is what is the hard part to do. Hang out in that trade, continue to just ride that trend until you actually get those signals. Like that's the hardest thing that took me the longest amount of time to learn, because really you would think, Coco, let's say it goes up 100%, which was last year. You could have got out then and gone, hey, I had a great trade 100%, it went to the old highs or something, from 2016, but then it went another 200% since then.
Right.
So, you know
And
what?
what people don't think about is when you put that trade on, when you first put it on, you had no idea it was going to move the way it moved.
Mhm.
You sized your position in a way that if you lost, it's just like any other loss, no big deal. But when that winning trade goes your way, not only is it just like a huge open profit, but now that huge open profit is a very meaningful percentage of your total value of your account. And now your account P&L, the value of your account is, a wild ride. And for a lot of people, that's tough to deal with.
Well, it's two things, right? So what you said first is correct. So you take your position, you make sure it's small enough that it's this small amount of your account. And as it grows over time, most of the time it's like, well, it's still this, small amount of my account, maybe it's gone up a little bit, maybe it's gone up a little bit more, but it's still usually a small amount. And then you have these crazy outliers, but also that which Coco is absolutely probably my craziest outlier I've ever had. But also it's absolutely just something you have to understand, that like if you want to have those returns, and also once you're in the trade, like to me this is profit. I'm willing to ride it because I know, like I've definitely, so my risk to reward is 5x, so 5 to 1. So if I can make 5% per trade and lose 1%, I'm making money most of the time. So now, we're at 10, 20, 30, 40 even. At this point, if it comes back to 30, I'm still saying, hey, well, it was a great trade. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think too many people get too into the fact that, like, hey, that trade could come against me a little bit. It's not going to be fun to handle that volatility. So I got to get out of it. And once again, it's like, if you just look at the data, like take yourself out of it completely, your feelings, your mindset, if you just look at nothing but the data and go, okay, well, the data says I would make more money if I didn't do anything. And that's really what I did. And so I finally looked at the data and I found out that if I do nothing, I will be making more money. And it's been profitable over time, but also it's painful at times. And I'm not going to lie, there's plenty of times where you go up and you're like, hey, this is great. And then it just comes right. I mean, there's weird events. There was a Palladium trade. I think this was in 2022. Palladium had some weird spike and it gave me a buy signal. And I think it was like something like 50, 60%. And then it gave it all back in a day. Like it just came, it was a weird spike. It like limited it up for a couple days and then came all the way back down to my stop. And I think it was like, instead of like a 50% gain, it became like a 10% gain. Those are
Jason,
painful.
So most people, most investors, your average market participant, could they trade your system or your process?
Yes and no. So one, I think everybody, I think everybody has to have figure out their strategy. I mean, that's the reason why like I do what I do and post it, because it's like, yeah, you could see it, cool, it's Coco, it's great, but I also think that you have to understand your personality. If your personality can't handle like that type of a, hey, it went from 40 to 1 to 30 to 1, then you shouldn't do it. Like I fully, but like because people like Jerry Parker, he gets into this debate all the time with people. Vol targeting stupid is what he says. And I think that vol targeting's just, it has to fit your personality. Some people need to vol target because it's
Yes.
not fun to do that. And then some
They
people
can't do
don't.
it. They can't
Yeah.
do it without that, right?
Yeah.
Because the biggest risk to a strategy like this is that you capitulate at the worst moment.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what ends up happening. Oh, I could wear a 50% drawdown, and then you get there and you don't.
Well, it's not so you'd be surprised. So the drawdown risk so I actually just did I'm actually working with someone who's putting together my portfolio to sell to more investors, and so we put together all my drawdowns over time. Futures portfolio, my worst drawdown in all these years has been 32%.
I would have thought it'd be higher.
You would have thought, yeah. And the same thing
And but the important thing to say about
that's
that is
futures and leveraged.
yeah, the important thing to say about that is you may have had a 32% drawdown, but that's in all likelihood that's after a large gain, right? Like
Yeah,
your
yeah.
biggest drawdowns are always coming after your largest gains.
My biggest drawdowns was after my largest gains. Yep, absolutely. So it's like I understand that that's going to happen. Also, if you do it, if you use my strategy in a different method, you use no leverage ETFs. The worst, because that's what we're looking at right now. The worst drawdown was 12%, and that's over the last 10 years. So once again, it's what type of strategy can you handle, and also it's like I really do work on the risk to reward. And then also it's like you have to understand those huge gains in one thing isn't my whole portfolio. So because I trade so many products, that's also another piece of it. I don't, it's not like Coco is my whole portfolio. Coco's maybe 10%, 11 now probably of my portfolio. Whereas, I still have oil trades. I have all these other trades that are doing well. And let's say, Cocoa starts to come off. It's very uncorrelated to other assets. So Cocoa could start to crash and give me a sell signal and everything else could uptick. Or, sometimes they all go together. I don't know. That's how you create these 30% drawdowns. And even 30%, like most people don't like 30%. It's the reason why we started to create more strategies without using leverage, because even 30% people don't really want to handle that, especially for investors.
Your targeted risk reward ratio is 5-1. How
Yes.
often is that actually achieved? And how many times are you falling somewhere in between and getting stopped out still for a profit, but maybe not for the 5x that you wanted?
So 5 to 1 doesn't happen nearly as much as so about 40% of the time. 30% most likely. 30% would actually. I have all this data right here, so that's why I'm just looking over this side. It's 5 to 1, 34%. So we hit 34% most of 34% of the time. But most of the time, 50% of the time, we're just having those chop trades that are basically, hey, I made nothing. Hey, it's zero. And then slight gains, slight losers, and then full losers, meaning that 1% of the portfolio. So that full loser is about 28% of the time you get to a full loser. So basically you're looking at it in a way that you have to understand that you're going to ride that chop at times, and then you're taking all that risk and all that chop to hopefully find some outliers like Coco and Bitcoin being another one, and so on. So those end up being the way you make your money. For me, I don't make my money because I have great intuition in the markets. I don't feel like I do. I make my money on taking my signals as they come. And when I get these great winners, fantastic. And when I don't, oh well.
So I cared less about the response to my question as I did about the fact that you could answer that question, right? Because I'm trying to illustrate a point. You're a quant, right? You run, Sean, far more automated of a system than anybody that we've had on the show yet. How does that impact your life? And was it always that way? also, how much time do you spend just quantifying, measuring, assessing your performance? Like you knew that off the top of your head. That has to be half of your day, and you're creating content a lot too, and writing. So, like, how much time are you actually spending trading at this point?
So analyzing the market's one thing. So analyzing the market, figuring out which regime we're in is mainly what I do as an analyst. That's where my technical analysis comes in. It gives me where I want to be taking my signals. My signals and my systems haven't changed. So once they're built, once I've made them, I do run a back test every year. Hey, let's see how this did all year long. Let's update the systems. Let's see how it goes. But really, my algos, I only really have to look at it once a day. So once a day, let's see what my algos spit out. Do I have a trade? Do I not have a trade? But once they're all running, it doesn't take me much time. That's kind of why I'm more open. We trend followers and quants, we all have this conversation all the time where it's like it's really boring shit. Like we're really bored. So it's because we'll be sending each other like cat memes and just stupid stuff, and it's like wait, we're just bored, because sometimes it's like it can become mundane, but that's also something we talked about earlier. Like good trading is boring. Like good trading is doing the same thing over and over again. Hey, let's run the system. Oh, did the system spit out a buy signal? Like I said the other day, or earlier today, the last 4 weeks, I haven't gotten a buy signal till today. So it's like doing the same thing over and over again, making it extremely boring. But also that's the part of it where I think writing really came in my life is that discipline to do the same boring thing day after day. I think most people would get really bored with this and be like, okay, look, like I'm in a drawdown period. I'm done with this. This sucks. For me, that's the way my brain is wired. I could do the same thing. I go out to eat. I order the same thing every time I go somewhere. The waitress, her name's Pam. She knows me, spot on. I go to this place called Hyde Park. We sit down. She goes, "Oh, you want the lamb chops? Oh, you want the what salad do I get? The wedge salad." I don't even say it anymore because she knows them all. I don't even think differently. So even when I go out to breakfast, it's the same thing. Like my life is identical almost every single day. I play basketball at the same time. I go to the gym at the same time. I ride my bike at the same time. Like it's kind of like the way I do it.
Yeah, you're a man about routine, and routine is so important for so many traders, myself included. And my routine might not be as regimented as yours, but I'm pretty routine as well.
And
It has
routine
to
is
be as a trader.
process. It's process in a way too, right?
It's like watching the show this morning and JC getting all excited about the monthly candlesticks. Like it's part of that routine of like how do I assess this market where it's at? Like maybe it's monthly candlesticks, maybe it's running an algo. It's all the same to me. Like it's just different ways of looking at different at the same problem basically.
When I think of athletes in finance, I think of these guys were tough. They worked hard. They learned how to lose, right? Deal with adversity. But you're talking more about the process or the routine of being an athlete. Waking up every day. This is boring. Hitting the gym, whatever. Doing the same thing from a trading perspective, right? And it gets monotonous at a certain point. But I don't think that's what comes to mind most of the time when we're thinking of like market parallels with athletes. So that's interesting.
But one of the great things about routines, I would point out there, is that as traders, we're using our brain a lot. Whether we're coming up with ideas, whether we're tinkering with new strategies, whatever, we need to spend a lot of energy on that kind of stuff. If we can, I don't want to say automate, but if we can make so many other parts of our life a little bit more routine so that we don't have to think about it. It's like we put ourselves on autopilot. I got to do this at 2:00. I got to do this at 3:00. And this is what I do every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever. Like those are things we don't need to spend energy thinking about so that we could focus on what we need to focus on, which is in our case, making money.
Yes. And, I was just going to say, like in training as an athlete, even though like you start to love that routine, like I'm joking when I say it's boring. I'm actually like excited to do these things, which is weird, like that's very abnormal. I think that's why people have trouble doing this and being an athlete or being a trader. It's very similar where it's like you have to enjoy that crazy part of the process where it's like you wake up, you're doing the same thing. you're like working on that one move again and again until you get it. It's the same thing like trading. Like you don't understand, let's say you're fundamental and you want to understand the bond market and you're reading every book and it doesn't make any sense and you're doing this for months on end. And then one day it kind of clicks and you go, oh, okay, that's how the bond market works. And then you move on to the next one. Like I think that's the part of it that's very similar, but most people wouldn't think it's similar, like you said.
But why is it that we really fall into routines or begin to trust processes? Is it result oriented or is it process oriented? In other words, do you start to enjoy and love your routine because the results are the fruits of that routine? Or do you fall in love with the process? I'm not a routine person.
I think there's a couple different things. One, think about Steve Jobs. Great example here. Gets up, puts the same turtleneck on every day, the same jeans, goes to work. So he doesn't have to make that decision. Same with Zuckerberg, I think does something similar. These people, they do the same things every day, so they don't have to make more decisions. So for me, it's kind of the same thing. It's like I don't have to really make many decisions every single day. I can just kind of get up, do the same thing, run my system, check. I mean, literally, everything's at the same exact time. I don't look at the money in my account, like my monetary account. I don't look at it until the weekend. Like things like that help me to do what I do, and I stay on that routine.
He's a systems guy, Sean. He's simply automating his life.
No, I
Right?
love it. I love it. I briefly lived your life, Jason, in the early aughts, early 2000s. I ran a small commodities hedge fund, trend following, much in the style that you're trend following as well. In fact, you mentioned Jerry Parker. Jerry Parker was a very early inspiration to me, early days. In fact, I started a small fund, and I've told Jerry the story that I found all of his disclosure documents and operating agreements and all this stuff online, and I plagiarized the shit out of it and did all my own stuff that I could present to my investors, and I got all that stuff from Jerry Parker.
Jerry Parker, as much as he may never know it, was Sean's lawyer.
Yeah. Jerry Parker was my legal advice. There you go.
Well, I mean, honestly, that's how most of us start because it's very hard to put all that stuff together. So, I had a buddy who sent me all of his and said, here, look at this. And I got it from another guy, so like it's kind of how it all starts for most of us. Not that we're plagiarizing, but we kind of are. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the worst part. And Sean and I, we haven't really had to live that life. You're in the midst of it. Like we got lucky. We had some early success and we have infrastructure around us. Shout out, Gene. Thank you for doing this. But when I do stuff with you, when I do content with you, you're running it. You're the back end. You're the middle operations. You're the front end, right? You're doing all of it. You're inspiring in that way. Like, is that just how you're built? Did you learn it? We always put a big emphasis on like playing with the tools, getting to know new tech. I feel like you really live by that.
Yeah, so I enjoy figuring stuff out, even though I feel like things don't come. I'm not an intuitive person. Like things don't come very easily to me most of the time, so I have to really like dig in. I mean, crap, even learning how to do bookmarks and well, not bookmarks, what are they? Thumbnails and stuff on, things like I even said the name right. Like learning things like that is just it's hard for me, but like really once I figure it out and once I'm very interested in it, I'm down to just kind of sit there, read about it, learn about it, watch everything to do with it, kind of try to figure it out. And I enjoy it. I really enjoy that aspect of things. I enjoy and the interviews all started because I remember one day it was like, I forget who I saw doing something, and I was like, oh, it'd be fun to just talk to traders. Just talk to other traders about trading. And then like, one day I interviewed it. I mean, if you look at my second interview, it's Victor Sprandio, and it's just like,
Wow.
Hey, man, will you come on my podcast? It'd be cool. I sent him like my returns for my fund, and I was like, yeah, this is what I'm doing, and it was like very very green of me to do all that stuff. But like, I just wanted him to like feel like he was actually coming on and talk with somebody legit, and so he ended up coming on. And then like after that, it's just more and more people came on the show. So it was like really cool and fun to do that for me because one, I still am even though like I'm pretty set in my ways as a trader, I'm so interested in learning about every style of trading. I recently started that ETF fund recently, so like now I'm running ETFs. So I'm always very interested in learning different styles of trading, different ways people do things, and just learning from others. Like I think that to me is the funnest thing in the world is just, hey, how do you do it? oh, cool. Like, and that's the fun thing about interviews like this is like, we get to just kind of have chats about how do you do it instead of, this is what we think it is. Sometimes it's completely different. Victor Sbrandio gave me, I've read all of his books. I've read his Market Wizards interviews. It was completely different than anything I ever talked to him or read from him. The interview was so different.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, Jason, let me ask you this. BMX biking, starting your own business, learning how to create thumbnails on YouTube, learning how to trade, fighting addiction, putting on TED Talks, all these things that you've done. What's the hardest thing you've ever done?
Addiction. Easily. I don't even have to think about that. It's absolutely so when you're going through that, you don't see a way out. And that's another thing is that like people around you don't see you getting out either. So it's like it's very similar to like if you think of a big fund and they're in their worst drawdown ever, and they're like, everybody's going, you guys are going to blow up. That's the end of it. And you're down 80%. And somehow you come back from that. That's kind of like how it feels to be an addict. Like you're in this mess of life and you've you've burned every bridge behind you. You've done everything that you never thought you would do, and you're at a place you never thought you'd be. And for me, the hardest part was really, it's the same thing that I always felt when I was a kid when I get hurt. It's the same thing. The hardest part for me was my riding. I couldn't ride anymore. Because how I got into drugs in the first place and became an addict was I was I got hurt riding. Sorry, I didn't get hurt riding, which is the dumbest one. I stepped on a nail. So I was cleaning up a course, and like I was helping. I shouldn't even have been helping someone. I was just trying to be nice, and I'm trying to help them put tarps on it because it was raining. I stepped on a nail, and at that time, like I've ruptured my spleen. I've had knee surgery. I'm like, stepped on a nail. It's nothing. I walk over to the medic and it's already closed up by that time. I don't even think twice about it. We get in the car, we start heading home. It was in Chicago. All of a sudden, my foot feels like it's a rock. And I'm like, what's wrong with my foot? I have no idea. I get home, I go to sleep, I wake up, I trash the whole house. And it's my ex-girlfriend girlfriend at the time. She comes home and she's like, what the hell did you do? I'm like, I need to go to the hospital now. She takes me to the hospital. The hospital literally sends me back home. And they're like, we don't know what's exactly wrong. They send me back home. Finally, I go to a different hospital and they go, well, you have staph infection. So I had a staph infection and then I had a bone infection. So the staph infection ended up going to my bone and they give you a PICC line for that. So you go home and basically I'm on this PICC line and for, what was it? Probably about a year. I'm taking IV antibiotics. They're also giving me every drug ever. At the time I had never even drank before. Never had a beer in my life, never, even smoked weed at this time. I was completely all about riding, didn't have any thoughts of any of those things. And then I started to feel funny. I asked my doctor, what's wrong with me? He goes, oh, you'll be fine in a couple days. You just need to get off of everything and you'll be fine in a couple days. And I thought that was true. And it wasn't. And so, basically from that point on, I was different, but I didn't really understand I was different. And so the fight of getting out of that was probably the hardest thing I ever had to deal with. And like now today I'm 14 years clean. And I say it out loud, I don't hide those things. I think there's people who hide the fact that they're addicts a lot because it's like, it's not looked at as good. People think they're going to lose a job from it. I probably have. I don't care at this point. I think it's also important for me, just like we talked about earlier, to pay it back. Like there's other people out there who might see it and struggle. Not to mention in finance, I haven't had anybody ever come to me and say, man, that's messed up. I've had more people come to me and say, hey, I have a problem. My kid has a problem. I'm clean. I'm not going to say names, but most of the CEOs I've ever met or people who've given me allocations are either in a program or clean themselves or running into their own problems with their own family, so it's I really try to say it out loud. I don't hide those things about myself either. And I think that also keeps me accountable. I think it's part of the reason why I've been clean for 14 years is because everybody knows about it. If I go to a place and have a beer, people are going to be like, what's wrong with you?
Well,
So
Jason, I really appreciate you sharing that story and being so open and honest about that. In the industry that we work in, I mean, addiction is a problem.
Hmm.
And it's not just one kind of addiction, right? It's
Hmm.
substance abuse, it's addiction, or it's gambling, it's
Yes.
all kinds of things. So I imagine that we have a good part of our audience that are watching this or listening to this podcast who can relate in some
Hmm.
way to what you're talking about. So was there anything when you were at the depths of that experience? Can you point to anything, whether it was a small thing or a large thing, that maybe helped you start to turn that corner?
I was missing moments in my life. I was missing, like, if you had, I had a friend who was going through a really rough time and I couldn't help. Um, I had my mother was very sick. I was worthless to her as well. Like I was trying to, I wanted to go try to get clean. And she was like, she was really sick. So I was like, well, at least I could be around and help. She had to pull me aside one day and tell me, I'm not helping her right now. I'm not helping her the way I am. And so that was something that was a huge wake up call to me. Like, you're not helpful to anybody that way. So the people you want to take care of, the people you love, the people you want to be around, your family, like, you're not helping them out when you're that way. So I think that was, to me, was the biggest thing that I started to wake up to. And I think that's the problem that a lot of us have, is that when we're in something, it doesn't matter, addiction, whatever it is, when we're in something, we have a box around us where we have tunnel vision. We can only see what's right in front of us. And like, we forget that there's this whole world out there. And also, the biggest thing for me was that I kept waking up in the same place and feeling like I was going to spend my whole life doing the same thing all the time. I was either going to be, I was going to end up in prison too. Like, I was either going to end up in prison for the rest of my life or something stupid. I mean, like, all you have to do is get caught with something and you can end up like that. So, you have to understand you can end up in prison. You could lose your life over something like that. So, I really tried to wake up to those things, identify those things, and just really kind of think that, I could be a much better person. I could be doing something different with my life. And also, I wanted to get, at that time, I wanted to get back to riding. I rode in one more contest after that. My goal was to ride in an international contest, make top 10 one more time. I was 25. I was kind of washed up at that point. I didn't think I was gonna come back to be able to do that, but I did do that. So, for me, I had goals, and I think it's important to, when you're in those places, to have goals outside of that stuff. When you're in that shit and you're stuck looking at nothing but crap all day, your goals just evaporate. And really, like, it's important to have goals outside of that. Like, are you going to start a company? Did I want to go back to riding again? And so continually to this day, that's also part of it. Like Steven mentioned, is like, I continue to have goals all the time. I'm really excited to do new things. I really like to work with new people, talk to new people, and just kind of learn. Like, learning's kind of my new drug. I really enjoy learning new things all the time. So that's kind of like, all of those things together kind of put me to where I'm at today.
well, it's a type A thing. You're still an addict, right? You're just
Yep.
getting into far healthier things today, right? And that's
Yes.
what's making you achieve all this and do all these different things. I also think, like, the takeaway from our talk today was that you have such an extreme comfort with risk. It allows you to achieve lofty goals or to aim high, right?
Hmm.
Um, Also, just from an addict standpoint, I mean, we've talked about this before. Where can people hear our conversation? Because I have my own story, it's still being written. But this kind of stuff, if you're in the throes of addiction or substance abuse, a 60% drawdown in the market, dude, the risk reward equation you're used to as an addict is nothing,
Yeah.
losing everything. So 60% on your soybeans contract is like, oh, that's cool, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely something here. And this is not uncommon either. Like, we're a bunch of square pegs. We're a bunch of weirdos, traders, right? And there's a reason for all that. And I think that's really what we're trying to get to the bottom of on this podcast. Like, we all have certain similarities where we come from less traditional, less conventional backgrounds and are
Mhm.
built differently. And I just think, I mean, you're just a shining example of this. So this is awesome.
No, thanks for this, man. This was a lot of fun. It's cool to have such a candid conversation about these things because it's in general, like a lot of people don't, we can't all the time everywhere. So thanks for having this platform to do that.
Yeah, Jason, it's been really great just to get to know you a little bit. This is my first time seeing you face to face, so to speak, and I'm definitely looking forward to meeting you in person in the near future.
Yes,
this is great, and I think we have the title for the show. Learning is my new drug. I like that.
Yeah, that's a good. It's catchy. It's catchy. It's catchy. Love it.